In our culture, we tend to think that our partner and our relationship is going to solve all our problems in life. I don't know about you, but I'm not that powerful.
Welcome to Sleeping Around, where we offer a peek behind the curtain of modern sex and relationship therapy and research, bringing you insights and conversations otherwise reserved for the therapy room. I'm your host, Alayna Joy, a Master's of Counseling Psychology student, content creator, and lifelong sex and relationship nerd. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sleeping Around. Today's episode is a bit of a full circle moment for me. Our guest is Michelle Becker, and while she's a marriage and family therapist and a senior trainer at the UC San Diego Center for Mindfulness, she is also a teacher trainer, mentor, and co-founder of the Teacher Training in the Mindful Self-Compassion program. This is the program that I used to teach, and Michelle was one of my teachers when I took the training. She's also written a book called Compassion for Couples, Building the Skills of Loving Connection. And so if after listening to this episode, you want more, that's the place to go. She specializes in training mindfulness and compassion in a relational context, so specifically for couples relationships. And she developed a training program called Compassion for Couples specifically for this reason. And that is what we talk about today. How do we get out of the negative communication patterns of little problems that become big problems in relationship? Through this conversation, Michelle teaches us tools and tips to use in relationship. She was a wonderful teacher back then and is just as wonderful of a teacher here in this conversation. So I won't keep you. I hope you enjoy the episode. How about you tell us a bit about your work, you, the book?
I'm really about people, and I'm about relationships, and I'm about compassion. And so that's really kind of how the book came about. I was teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion teacher training. And you may remember we have these special interest tables where people sit down, people with a like interest sit down and get to connect with each other. Mm-hmm. And so I was sitting at the table with a group of people that were talking about couples. And they said, well, Michelle, how would you work with this with couples? And I said, well, in session 1, I would do this. And in session 2, I would do this. And then I thought, somebody needs to do that. Because, there's something about our primary relationships, whether it's with your partner or whether it's with your sibling or your coworker or dear friend, or they matter so much. They make such a big difference in our lives. When they're going well, it's this huge, tremendous support. And when they're not going well, it really drags us down, So targeting compassion to that, these like really important relationships in our life has the potential to really make a difference.
Can we start from the beginning in terms of, let's define compassion? We're talking about compassion for couples specifically, but just compassion as a concept. What does that mean? What does it look like?
Yeah, it's a great question because people get really confused about what compassion is. So they think sometimes they just think it's a soft and fluffy thing and that it's weak or it doesn't help motivate us or whatever. But really compassion is just the thing that arises when we see suffering in ourselves or another person and it's met with kindness and a wish to alleviate the suffering to the extent that we can. It's not always possible, but to the extent that we can. So it's really another facet of kindness, if you think about it, that kindness is sort of this umbrella. And when kindness meets suffering and stays warm, then it turns into compassion. What can I do to help alleviate your suffering? Mm-hmm. Or prevent it, So compassion, I like to say, is concerned with the prevention and alleviation of harm.
I love that. Compassion is kindness that meets suffering and stays warm. I can think of all these applications in couples, right? And in theory, how this idea of kindness and warmth and wanting your partner to not suffer and, wanting to alleviate and prevent their suffering because you care and wanting the same in return. What does it actually look like in practice?
What typically happens is, as human beings, we physiologically are wired that when we feel some sort of threat, whether that's to ourselves or to our relationship, we go into what we call the threat defense system. And a lot of people know about that as fight, flight, freeze, right? It's a great thing because evolutionarily it has helped us survive. So if our lives are in danger, we want this threat defense system. We want to be able to fight off danger or run away from it or like play dead. But it's really bad for happiness. It does not foster happiness, and it doesn't foster healthy relationships. So in relationships, what happens, I've been curious about, okay, so what happens when we get caught in this fight, flight, freeze system, the threat defense system? What are the behaviors that we do relationally? And so what we tend to do is fight turns into attacking or defending, and flight turns into withdrawing, and freeze turns into either just this sort of shut down, confused state or placating. Where we go like, yes, dear, we agree with whatever they say, or tell them what we think they want to hear, even though we don't actually believe it. And none of those things help our partners feel close to us. So in compassion, by the way, is kind of like a flashlight, or, we can shine it in whatever direction we want. So we can shine it toward ourselves, and we call that self-compassion. We can shine it outward toward others, and we just call that generally compassion. When we're in one of these states, the threat defense system has kicked in and we're in one of these states, we can practice self-compassion. We can begin to do things to comfort and soothe ourselves so that our reactivity goes down. Because when we're in the threat defense system, we're highly reactive. The wisdom is gone. Our prefrontal cortex, the executive function, the part that can logic and reason and think about consequences, that's offline. Right? So we do these things that, we maybe, yell, or we call a name, or we, whatever, that is going to cause harm. So with compassion, we take a little bit of space, we take a moment for ourselves, and we begin to comfort and soothe ourselves, to calm ourselves. And we can use Kristen Neff's self-compassion break. It's a real simple thing. We can say, like, acknowledge, like, wow, I'm really stressed right now. I'm really stressed right now. This is not going well. That's a mindfulness piece, just landing in the truth of what is. And then we can say, and relationships can be like that. Like, life gets hard sometimes. This is my human wiring, my physiology that gets activated. It's not because something's wrong with me. This is the way humans are, right? Common humanity. It's like, it's what it's like to be a human being in relationship. We don't always put our best foot forward. And then we can say, what do I need right now? Like, how do I be kind to myself? Whether that's a physical gesture, like putting our hands on our heart or patting ourselves on the back, whatever it might be, or whether it's just some kind words. It says, it'll be okay. You'll get through this, right? And when we turn toward ourselves with some self-compassion, our physiology begins to settle. It begins to calm. And we switch out of that threat defense system that's so reactive, and the wisdom comes back online. Now we can actually determine what is really skillful here, what is really needed here. Not my impulse, but what's the higher level good. And so then maybe we don't say, you're such a jerk, I can't believe you just did that, which maybe is what we wanted to do in our threat defense system. But because we've calmed a little bit, we can begin to see the other person in a different way too. So we treat them in a different way. We say, like, you know what, that was really not okay with me. Like, I'm really not okay with what you did. I know that you're stressed, and I know, but if you yell at me, I can't stay connected and I can't lean in and help you. So could you tell me again in a different way?
The internal process of self-compassion break, right? Like, this is a hard moment. It's part of humanness to have hard moments. What do I need right now? That being kind of step one, or like the process to calm yourself, to translate that then to communicating with the partner in a way that stands up for yourself and like protects yourself, sets a boundary, whatever it is, expresses yourself truly and says, this is not okay with me. That I almost wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. Because
you hear compassion and we're talking about the alleviation of suffering of others. You almost think, oh, this is a caretaking. Yeah. Like I'm, where's the piece about what I need, or how do I maintain my safety, my emotional safety, and the things that I require while also alleviating my partner's suffering.
Right. So really, when we talk about self-compassion, Kristen Neff operationalized self-compassion. She said there's three components. There's mindfulness, there's common humanity, and there's kindness, right? And she says mindfulness versus over-identification or rumination, how kind of our field of vision can narrow down to just that one problem, just that one thing, and we can turn it over and over and get stuck on it, ruminate on it. And common humanity versus isolation. Common humanity says this is just the way it is being a human being. Isolation says it's just me, I'm the only one with this problem. And kindness versus self-judgment or self-criticism. But I like to think of all these things actually as along a spectrum. And so, and when I look at them in terms of relationships as well, so mindfulness sits along a spectrum. And on one end of it, yes, just like Kristen Neff talks about, it is rumination or over-identification, where our field of vision narrows down to just that one point. On the other end of the spectrum, we fail to notice. We fail to see. We're numbed or whatever else is going on, right? So mindfulness sits in the middle, and it's kind of a balanced awareness. And it says this is truly how things are right now. So in a relationship, it doesn't get stuck on just the negative qualities. It holds a larger context, and it says, this person who maybe is criticizing me, if that's one of the behaviors, the unskillful behavior that's coming out, is also kind to me at other times, is also wise, is also loyal, is also so it holds it in a larger frame, right? It's not just this thing that I don't like. It doesn't get stuck on that. The common humanity piece, which is kind of the piece you were talking about, is along a spectrum too. So instead of just saying it's common humanity versus isolation, it's just me, a lot of us, especially those of us who were socialized as girls, were taught that we needed to caretake others, that we needed to really only pay attention to others. It's just others, it's just me. And so we get stuck sometimes in this dynamic that you were just pointing us to, which is like, I'm not supposed to consider myself, I'm not supposed to matter kind of thing. It's just all about what does the other person need. But common humanity, again, is the balanced, and it says everyone matters, everyone belongs. So in a relationship, no relationship is going to be healthy or work in the long term if it's all about one person. Whether it's just all about me or it's just all about you. It has to have both. So in any given moment, it might be skillful to focus more on the other person or to focus more on ourselves. But over time, we need to really focus on both people. So in that example, that's what I was doing, right? I was like looking at, okay, me and you, and the relationship, But then the other piece is just kindness. And kindness also sits along a spectrum in my mind. It's kindness versus this sort of coldness of self-judgment or self-criticism. But on the other end of the spectrum, we can be too warm, if you will, where really self-indulgence lives, where we really get caught in like, hey, I feel like eating ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? It's actually not kind if you think about it. It might feel good in the moment, but it's not truly kind. That's where kindness also sets limits and boundaries, right? Because it isn't kind to let somebody treat us in a way that's harming us. It isn't kind to us, but it isn't kind to them either, or the relationship.
That's exactly kind of what I was trying to get at and the way that you put it in terms of each of those sort of facets being along a continuum, that's the question lives in that spectrum, right? The question is in each of those pieces, how do you find the balance point when each of us naturally will tend toward one end or the other?
Right, we will. And so whatever the natural tendency is, we need to work on the other side of it. I've had couples in therapy where I've said to both of them, you need to focus more on her. So in a hetero couple, I'm saying to the guy, you need to focus more on her. How does she feel? What does she need? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying to the woman, you need to focus more on you. You need to be saying more about how you feel and what you need, right? Because that relationship as a whole has gotten skewed in one particular direction.
let's say I'm imagining somebody listening and they're going, okay, yes, I'm ticking those boxes you've described. I tend to put my partner's needs ahead of my own.
Yeah.
I have trouble expressing my true feelings, trouble setting boundaries. Maybe this is somebody who has worked with self-compassion in the past and has a sense of what they need, has a sense of being able to comfort themselves, but is struggling to make that leap into communicating that, or like saying, this behavior or this way that you're making me feel isn't okay with me.
Right.
How do we work on that?
At a foundational level, it depends on how safe we feel in the relationship. And some relationships are just not safe. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in a relationship that is just not safe, and it's not safe for you to say how you feel, that's a problem. And get some support, get some help with that to figure out what you want to do about the relationship. So we kind of need this foundation of like, is it safe? You know, we don't want to be harmed verbally or physically just by saying what we need. But assuming it is safe to tell our partners how we feel or what we need. Self-compassion is super helpful in the beginning to kind of help us. But also then we want to learn some communication skills. Like, how do we speak up, right? So there are formulas like that. Like I like Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. And the formula basically is when you X, I feel Y, and I need Z, right? Mm-hmm. It's a good general formula. But, you know, the truth of the matter is, even with good formulas, what gets communicated when we're talking to our partner is the state we're in. I do this kind of fun thing with the couples that I work with, especially in classes that I teach. So I have the couples imagine for a moment that they've had a really good night's sleep and they woke up naturally without the alarm going off, and they have a great day ahead of them, and they look over and they see their partner and say good morning to each other from this place, you know. And so they say like, you know, good morning, whatever, right? And they say, okay, now imagine that you had a terrible night's sleep. Your alarm went off, you didn't get enough sleep, you have this really busy day ahead of you, you're late, and you don't have enough time to get there. And to make matters worse, you look over and you see your partner and you're just really unhappy with them. Okay.
Oh, no.
You know, now.
Oh, so fun. Such a fun exercise, Michelle.
Right. Well, so now say good morning from that place, you know, and they're like, you know, morning, you know, and then I say, okay, now imagine that, you know, you woke up, you had a decent night's sleep, and you look over and you see your partner and you want to make it a good morning. In other words, you know, flirt with them a little bit, right? And say good morning from that place. And then they start cracking up a little bit, right? And the point of that really is that the words in all three cases are the same. The words are good morning. But what we have communicated is very different in each of those three scenarios, right? So we really do need to kind of take that space and tend to how we're feeling. Because if you're trying to stand up for yourself from a really defensive place, that's what's going to come across. Or if you're feeling nervous about it and you're a little edgy in it, you know, and you're angry when you say it, that's what's going to come across. But if you're really solidly grounded in, you know what, I'm a human being too, and I matter, and my partner does want for me to be happy. And it's important that I let them know what's making me happy and what's not making me happy so that we can be happier together. And also if we're holding that in the context of they're also a good person, maybe they're doing something we don't like, but they're also a good person, and it's not because they're a bad person or because they're mean, then we can communicate whatever our needs are from a better place, and it gets received better.
I love what you just said about reminding yourself, my partner also wants me to be happy. That's almost maybe a temperature check for the safety question in the relationship, is when you're in those conflict situations or you imagine yourself in a conflict and then you think to yourself, well, my partner also wants me to be happy. Like reminding myself of that or thinking that just now, it like landed in a way that feels very comforting, very safe. It feels warm. It feels like, oh yeah, you know, speaking your mind, obviously in a kind and constructive, helpful way for both people, it's important and it's helpful, and it is how you build a foundation for a relationship that's going to last.
Right.
And I'm imagining the person listening who's thinking to themselves, okay, my partner also wants me to be happy. And that leaves a question mark, right? Like maybe that statement is like, ooh, I don't know if that's helpful for me. I wonder if that's possibly a red flag, which it kind of leads me into one of the questions that I saw from my audience when I asked what they would like to know.
Yeah.
A lot of folks were asking about conflict generally,
Yeah.
and kind of how to know how much conflict is too much conflict, or when is it time to seek outside help? When is it too much? Time to end the relationship? Like, essentially, how do you know?
What's interesting about that is you didn't ask me how much conflict is too little conflict, you know?
Ooh. Yeah, no, I didn't.
Right? Because there is, I mean, look, we're separate human beings, right? And we're different people, and we have different preferences, if that makes sense, and we experience things differently. There is going to be some amount of conflict just because we're not going to agree on everything. We're different people. It's okay, right? So some degree of conflict is important, normal, expected, right? But when I think about where it's going awry, which is basically what you're asking, it's a couple of things. It's the tone and the tenor, really. It's like, is the conflict making us feel unsafe? Do the conflicts get resolved in some way? Do we learn and grow from the conflict? You know, we should be learning and growing from the conflict. When a conflict happens, it's an opportunity to learn more about ourselves and to learn more about our partners and to learn more about our relationships also, right? I could learn from a conflict, oh, I really need to feel seen and heard, for example. That could be something I come away with learning. I could also learn from that, my partner really needs physical affection. Like my partner really, touch is really important to them, right? And I could also come away from that learning, this relationship needs time. This relationship is healthier when we do things together. And different relationships are different. So some relationships are like thrive on adventure, or some thrive on family time, or it's just, you know, different things are different, but we can learn more about them. And often conflicts are the pathway to learning more about ourselves and our partners and our relationships.
What a reframe of conflict. Nobody asks how much conflict is too little conflict.
And we could think about that on the mindfulness spectrum, you know, on the end of like not noticing, not, you know, like, are we just sort of gliding along on a surface level and not really rocking the boat?
We're kind of speaking in terms of general conflict and conflict in couples. What about if there's been a breach of trust of some kind or a betrayal? Can compassion or your work, does that kind of come into play in terms of rebuilding?
Yeah, there's a lot that comes into play in terms of rebuilding. So one of the things that happens when people really start to kind of look at compassion for couples and look at their patterns is people start to become aware of their own personal pattern. Like, when I feel unsafe, what's the thing? Like I mentioned, fight, flight, freeze kicks in. But then we have our go-tos of what we tend to do. Do we tend to be attack, defend? Do we tend to withdraw? Do we tend to placate? You know, we have our go-tos. So when people begin to become familiar with their own go-to, and hold that in the context of common humanity, that this is just our human wiring. It's not because I'm bad, it's just that's my physiology. Then they could start to explore and understand their partners. Maybe I'm a withdrawer. Like that's my go-to. But maybe I learned that when my partner is feeling unsafe and they're feeling threatened, they attack. They get attack or defend. So when I get into withdrawing, it's not because I don't love my partner. It's not because I don't want to be with them in an overall sense. It's because I feel unsafe in that moment. My threat defense system is kicked in and I don't know a better thing to do. So then I can start to notice that when my partner does their thing, and think in this case we said attack, right? Attack, defend. That when my partner's attacking, it's not about me. It's not about do they love me or respect me. It's really, it's the red flag for them that says, oh, my partner's feeling unsafe right now. They're distressed. They're in their threat defense system. And so when we start to understand it that way, it depersonalizes it, because otherwise, if I'm being attacked, I think, oh, it's about me, right? Because it's an attack on me, right? And about how much I'm loved or I'm not loved, or it's about my partner and how much of a jerk they are, right? But when we start to see that behavior, that unskillful behavior it's not about me. It's about my partner, and it's a sign that they're in distress right now. That really begins to shift everything. Totally begins to shift everything, right? Because now I don't necessarily get dysregulated because they're dysregulated. I don't catch the upset. If I know it that way, I can notice that attack, and without becoming dysregulated myself, I can say, what's really going on here? Did something happen at work? Are you stressed about something? Right? And begin to turn it in a different direction, if that makes sense.
It's one of those things that I know, like, logically.
Yeah.
We hear this, right?
Yeah.
You know, we each kind of have our own triggers. We have our own patterns.
Yeah.
Mentally, intellectually, you know that when you when you go into those places in your relationship, it's, you know, it's old patterns repeating itself. It's really not about either of you.
Yeah.
You know that. But something about the way that you just put it in terms of taking my own understanding, that for me, I'm like a more of the like placate, repair. Yep. I'm like, I need this to be fixed right now.
Yep.
I know that my behavior in that way, even if it's dishonest, right? Like I'm not actually feeling the way that I'm saying I'm feeling. I know for myself, it has nothing to do with me not loving my partner or not wanting to be honest or whatever. It's like, this is my pattern.
And you're doing that probably to restore safety. So that all those threat defense systems are designed to restore safety. So like, let me tell you what I think will calm you down. Then you won't be angry. Then I'll feel safe. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But taking the understanding that my behavior right now is like, despite my love for my partner, it has nothing to do with her.
Exactly.
Flipping that and being able to apply that felt sense to her behavior or to whatever partner's behavior when it doesn't make sense to me or it feels personal.
Right.
Something about that has it like landing different. Like your example of the withdraw versus the attack.
Yeah.
If I'm the withdrawer, I know I love my partner. I'm withdrawing for XYZ reason. The other person feels that as a personal attack. If I'm the attacker, you know, later you probably look back and go, oh man, I love my partner. I shouldn't have. I don't know why I behaved that way.
Right.
That was just a really helpful way to contextualize it.
You said when you really realize that, something shifts inside you.
Yeah.
Would you mind saying a little bit more, if you're comfortable enough, about what exactly shifted? How did it feel different?
That's such a good question. For those listening, I'm kind of doing this motion of like my hand is moving from my throat down into my stomach. Like it feels like a solidifying. There's a shift from, I'm going to say, closed to open. Like it feels, if I'm imagining conflict with my partner and I'm imagining our pattern, you know, there's that kind of tense feeling in the body. There's this almost dread of like, ugh, it's icky feeling. I don't enjoy that.
Yeah.
But then finding some sort of new understanding, it feels like, like a release of that tension.
Yeah.
And being able to maybe pull her in, or like a warming, like all these nice, better feelings.
These are great examples. Thank you for articulating that so beautifully, actually. So you're saying you feel more solid, you feel more open, there's a relief of tension, kind of an and then you want to pull her in. You just described compassion in the body sense, right? I mean, that's really, you so beautifully described moving from that tense, tightened, closed off state of the threat defense system into compassion, and that's what happens. And so you can see how much easier it is. And then you said you want to pull her in, right? When you're in that spot. So you see how moving into that state of compassion actually, and that wasn't even a relational thing. Like that was just an understanding. Like in that moment, you remembered, oh yeah, this isn't about me. In the same way that when I do my pattern, it isn't about her. And that's the piece, I think, when we start to see it. And that's why it's often good to start with compassion for ourselves, because we can use that to foster wisdom, right? So when you start to see your own pattern and you hold that in the context of common humanity and like, oh, it isn't because I don't care about her. Then it's a little more easy to believe that when she does whatever she does, it isn't because she doesn't care about you. She's just also like you. She's a human being caught in whatever she's caught in, who's not feeling safe in that moment,
What a tough thing to remember in those moments.
The more we visit it, the stronger it becomes and the more readily available it becomes eventually in the moment where we go, I know what this is. This isn't about me. She's had a bad day, or, whatever it might be.
And it's really hard to describe before you've experienced it, right? That the shift I kind of described. So I'm inviting everybody who's listening and watching to, follow along, play along, see what happens for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Take a moment and consider that. What do you usually get caught in? Is it a reflection of how much you care about your partner or not? Is it really just your own distress manifesting? And then consider what your partner typically does. And consider the possibility that perhaps just like you, it's more about them being in distress than how much they care about you. And then how does that land in the body, like physically, and emotionally, how does that land?
And so what about in the context of something more difficult, like there's been a breach of trust or some sort of rupture in the relationship? How does this all play out in that context? Or how do you work with couples in that context?
There is a similar thread to it, which is why I went to the other place first. There is a similar thread to it that betrayal is it's not okay. It's harmful. It's injured us. It's injured our trust, right? So it's not okay. So we're holding that boundary the way that we were talking about earlier. But also we're understanding this is also not about me. It affects me. It impacts me. It's injured me. But it's really about my partner and their distress, and they made poor choices based on that distress, if that makes sense. Which is not saying we're okay with the choices they've made. We're not okay with it, but we understand it differently. So in order to start rebuilding, we have to restore safety, right? And so the partner has to stop whatever the behavior is. You can't rebuild a relationship where trust is continuing to be broken. It doesn't work, right? So the partner has to stop the behavior. And one of the things that helps the partner to stop the behavior quite often is really getting a sense of the harm that behavior has caused their partner, you, that has caused the relationship. So that's really important. So that's part of the kind of forgiveness process, if you will, because I think that's kind of what you're talking about is forgiveness. So we have to acknowledge the thing that we've done, and then we need to really land in and understand and hear the pain that we've caused our partner. We can't really skip that step. And that step takes a long time, and it's often very uncomfortable, and we kind of want to get out of it. Like, okay, I'm sorry I hurt you. Remember the game Monopoly? There's this get out of jail free card. And so that's what I think the typical apology is. I call it, when it's like, I'm sorry. Well, I apologized. Like, no. It's not a get out of jail free card. I'm sorry.
I
it's
apologized.
not. Yeah.
This never comes up again now. It's fixed.
Right. Exactly. No repair really happens without landing in the harm that was caused. And the thing about when we land in the harm that was caused, like if I injured you and I landed in the harm that I caused you, it feels so bad to me because I care about you. It feels so bad to me to have harmed you that I don't want to go do it again.
Right.
So it's part of the restoring the safety mechanism is I don't want to do it again because I don't want to feel so bad about having harmed you. I don't want seeing your pain is painful for me, and I don't want to see that happen again, if that makes sense. And then also for the partner that was betrayed, that was harmed, there's something healing about having your partner present with you as you're explaining the pain that, this is how I feel. This is what has harmed me. There's something healing about being witnessed and supported in that way. That's a part, I think, an important part of the repair process and how we move forward. So it's really, we could think about that also in terms of the three components. We could say, opening to the harm that was caused is really mindfulness, right? And common humanity is recognizing that this person did whatever they did because of some distress that they were in. And then the kindness piece of it. What do you need? That's important too. How can I make a repair? What do you need to feel safe again?
We've kind of covered broad themes of conflict and betrayal. What are some other common concerns that you see when you work with couples, and how does compassion fit into resolving them?
I think that generally speaking, what I see a lot of is that couples who've kind of lost their way. Maybe there's financial stress, maybe there are health issues, maybe you're raising a family and there are a lot of demands that come with that, or you've got a stressful job, right? There's a lot of just stress that happens. It kind of kicks in the threat defense system, right? And it's sort of like, I'm dealing with the stress right in front of me. And we can sort of drift away from each other in a certain kind of way, right? I'm dealing with my stresses over here, you're dealing with your stresses over here. We can kind of get used to putting out the fires and not really staying in touch with each other, not being on the same team. And then we can feel alone with it. You're always at work and I'm here stuck with the kids, and we can start to feel a little resentful about that. And of course, the person who's at work is a little resentful because they're the one that's, feeling the financial responsibility, right? And you get to be home and you get to, whatever it is, or no. So it's often a lot of things like that. The stressors of life have come in and caused a kind of a disconnection. And the longer the disconnection goes on, if couples come in early on and they start to work with compassion, they find each other again. They remember that not only are each of them important, but the relationship itself is important. And the relationship itself needs time and certain attention and activities. Pretty easy repair. But the longer it goes on, and blame starts to set in and bitterness starts to set in and people become really, really closed and really, really armored, it's more of a process to heal, to feel safe again, to feel connected again.
Where do they start?
They start kind of with the stuff that we were talking about, where we start, with our own and then try to understand each other. Starts with really self-compassion. There's this thing called the Cinderella complex. I don't know if you've heard of it. Mm-mm. So in my generation, I'm a bit older than you are. The fairy tale Cinderella, this idea that for girls, at some point, Prince Charming will come along and sweep us off our feet and then we'll live happily ever after, right? Mm-hmm. So in our culture, we tend to think that our partner and our relationship is going to solve all our problems in life. I don't know about you, but I'm not that powerful. I can't solve all of anybody's problems. I can't even solve all my own problems, right? So, we're bound to be disappointed with each other if we think this relationship is going to solve all our problems. And, early on in a relationship, it kind of does. Because early on in a relationship, physiologically, we're flooded with this hormone cocktail that just makes us feel so darn good. And we actually cannot see the qualities in our partners that we don't like. Like, we just can't see them.
Right.
But, maybe 18 months in, at some point, that hormone cocktail wears off. And now we're like, oh my God, really? You do that annoying thing and that annoying thing? And that, maybe you're not the person I thought you were. And we start to feel disappointed, right? Because we start to recognize that fantasy, that Cinderella complex, is not going to happen. Like, we're not going to live happily ever after just because we fell in love with this particular person. Life is still going to have the problems that life has, If we are depending on our partners to regulate us, we're in trouble, right? Because I'm the only person I have access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So even though my partner wants to, they can't always be there for me. Because we're humans, right? We get sick, we go to sleep, we go on vacation. We just can't always be there to solve, So we have to have self-compassion. We have to know, how can I comfort and soothe myself, right? Mm-hmm. And then from that place, when we're more regulated, it's a lot easier. When our needs have been met, it's a lot easier to be there for somebody else because we do care.
It's kind of a overused metaphor at this point, but the put on your own mask before you put on somebody else's. You can't give from an empty cup. All of those things. It's
true and not true in a way, right? So the question always or often comes up, is self-compassion a prerequisite for compassion? And the answer actually is no.
Right.
Because we can be compassionate to others without concern for ourselves. And we can, and we do often, but it's not sustainable over the long term. So
Right.
really, in order to sustain compassion, of course we have to be filling our own cup.
In your work with couples, is there anything that you wish that everybody knew?
I mean, I kind of want to say, it's not about you.
Ooh, yeah,
You know?
I like that.
Like your partner's behavior is not about you.
I hope that this conversation was a first step, a third, fourth step for anybody listening in terms of really having that land. Because
Yeah.
it's so important.
It's not about you. Conflict is normal, and we don't want to be unsafe in our conflict. We want to be safe in our conflict. And conflict is really the path to deeper intimacy, to knowing ourselves and each other better.
Michelle's book will be linked in the show notes. It'll be linked in the description. Where else can people find you?
On my website, wisecompassion.com. And I do have a podcast. It's called Well Connected Relationships.
Okay, that'll also be linked below. And now we're going to hop over into the Patreon exclusive version. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. You can also access all of our extended cut episodes with bonus content from every single guest over on Patreon at patreon.com/AlaynaJoy. That's patreon.com/ALAYNAJoy. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at sleepingaroundpod for updates, teasers, episode discussions, and more. This episode was produced by Alayna Joy and Danae Fender and edited by Corey Mosqueda. See you next time back here on the couch.